What would you say to somebody who is in a relationship like that? And let's go ahead and go to the abuser who is emotionally vacant. And there is a family crisis, some sort of crisis that comes up, car accident, whatever. What are you going to say to them to help them cope and to know what their next steps should be? I mean, they just can't do this alone.
No. Find your network of support. I mean, that's the important thing, is hopefully you're in a position where you do have a network of support. Now, what we know to be true about abusers are all about isolating you from your network of support.
Mhm.
And so, if you're in that situation where you have no network of support, you're an island. I would say try to find support
Mhm.
if the abuser allows for it at all, because you're not going to find it from the abuser.
Right.
Hopefully there's a person in your life. If there's not, I mean, that's why every shelter that I know of has a crisis hotline. You can
Mm.
always find somebody to talk to. I mean, the difference is a network of support is usually built around people with commonalities, common interests, and built around trust.
Mhm.
For calling a cold call number, so to speak, is not necessarily a built on trust relationship, but
Mhm.
we have to be able to have a safe space to feel our feelings and to talk about the things that we're going through. And if we don't have that safe space, again, it will physically take its toll on us.
Mhm.
And so that would be the encouragement, is if you're in an abusive situation where you're dealing with a partner who's emotionally vacant and abusive, you're going to go through some stuff. You still need to be able to process through it. And so if you've been isolated from your known network of support, there are still people that you can contact. There's still ways to have conversations around it.
That's good.
I mean, that's the challenge, is who do you call? When do you call? Can you call?
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. So if this person that you're talking to has nobody to turn to, they have no way of calling. Maybe the abuser takes the cell phone with him when he goes to work every day, and there's no way to communicate. There's no computer, there's no tablet, there's no nothing, there's no internet. So this person stays because there's no way to escape at the moment. What are the chances that things are going to begin to escalate and get worse? Because now you have two islands there trying to coexist, essentially.
Right, right. So what we know about domestic violence is it intensifies in frequency and intensifies in the type of abuse over time. And so the longer a relationship is abusive, the more intense it becomes. Now, I have seen kind of the antithesis of that happen before, to where someone had been physically abused at the beginning of a relationship, but as time went on, the physical abuse stopped. That does not mean that the relationship wasn't abusive anymore. At some point, abusers use the tactics that they have to use to maintain the power and control. If you've been physically assaulted enough times, someone can maintain power and control over you without physically assaulting you. And so it doesn't mean that the relationship hasn't got, all of a sudden it's not being abusive anymore. I mean, there's still those things going on. So we do have to pay attention to that. But what you're creating, the scenario you just created, is extremely volatile.
Mhm.
And let's talk a minute about in the past couple of years what we've gone through in our country and our world.
Thank
We talked about this off camera prior, the pandemic that was a worldwide pandemic. And what we saw was people being recommended that people stay at home, and don't go anywhere, you're at home. And so that scared me when I heard about that,
you.
because here's what I envision children who are victims of child abuse, victims of domestic violence, now both are being forced to stay at home with their abuser, who may or may not have been allowed to go to work, who may or may not have been being paid to not be there. So the normal life stressors that cause stress and anxiety are exponentially worse when you're an abuser with those normal life stressors. that was my initial concern, is what do you do? Because now you're completely isolated from the rest of the world. Even if you can go somewhere, you can't go somewhere. What do
Mhm.
you do?
Mhm.
You're probably in the same household all day long. You can't call a hotline.
Mhm.
What do you do?
You do your best to hunker down and survive.
You're 100% in survival mode.
Mhm. Constantly 24/7.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of victims of domestic violence are constantly in survival mode 24/7. You know,
Mhm.
the ones that are extremely isolated, like the scenario you just described, regardless, take the pandemic away from it, you're still basically being held hostage in your home.
Oh, yeah.
You're in complete survival mode all of the time. And so, again, referring back to that woman in the support group this past week, she wasn't in the home of her abuser anymore. And so the realization all of a sudden of, first of all, her words were, "This is a really challenging topic that is uncomfortable for me to talk about." Well, that's okay.
Mhm.
And that's the answer. That's okay. I understand that this is a challenging topic that's uncomfortable. But as the topic went on and the topic went on, she felt more encouraged to participate. And then as she began to participate, then there's the words of, "I don't even know how to talk about this, but here I am talking about it." And now all of a sudden, here comes the emotion. And then realizing I'm in a completely safe space where everybody sitting in this room is accepting of the fact that I have the emotion.
Yep.
Another person sitting in the room also had emotion, but her emotion was almost rage.
Wow.
And it's acceptable for that too. I mean, there's a way to manage all of that,
Mhm.
but again, just goes to prove to you that as emotional beings, which we all are, we don't all behave the same thing in the same behave the same way in the same scenario. So what triggered a tearful response in one person triggered a rageful outburst in another person, and they were both appropriate given the setting that we were in.
Mhm. Yeah, it makes
So, I
perfect.
mean, that's the goal when you're dealing with somebody in a crisis situation, is to create a safe enough space for them to feel that the way that they feel, and then take somebody who's up here, whether it's up here sobbing or up here screaming, and bring it down here.
Mhm.
Crisis intervention is still the same. Crisis intervention is crisis intervention.
Yeah. And one thing I'll toss out, it's a piece of trivia, but to me, it's more than trivia. It helps me when I get into those times when I need to sob and I need to break down and cry. Scientists found years ago, I'm talking probably, I don't remember, 15, 20 years ago, I read this, that when we cry and begin to sob in those kind of crisis situations, but then as the tears continue and the sobbing continues, those are old tears.
Mhm,
They are old
mhm,
subjects that are
mhm.
coming up as well. Do you want to touch on that?
100%. Do you know how many times I've heard a woman, specifically a woman, say, I'll cry about that later?
Yeah.
Have you ever heard a woman say that? Have
Hmm.
you ever said that? I've
I
said
have.
that.
Yeah.
I can't do that right now. Whatever I'm doing right now does not allow for me to feel the grief that I feel. So I'm
Hmm.
gonna shove that down inside of me and I'll cry about it later. But
Hmm.
then what happens is later never comes.
Hmm.
And then something comes along and triggers that emotional response, and you cry for hours.
Hmm.
Because I don't understand it. I don't understand the physiology of it, but somehow we have that ability to, when the dam is released, the dam is released. And we're crying about things that may have happened 10 years ago.
Hmm. Hmm.
I don't know how we do that, but I know that we do that. Specifically women have the ability to do that. How many women have you ever heard say it was a good cleansing cry?
Yeah, I have, and I've done it myself.
Because all of a sudden you let some of that stuff go.
Hmm.
But it's the same respect to the pressure cooker. Like people do that with anger, shove their anger, shove their anger, shove their anger, and the last thing, and then they're angry about everything.
Hmm.
We do that with anger as well. We can do that with tears as well in our grief. It's interesting that we have the ability to control that kind of stuff.
It really is. I
To
know
a
I've had,
point.
yeah, exactly. I've had times where I've just been in a funny situation and you're with your friends and people are just ripping off jokes one after another, and you're just crying, and then somebody tells one that just has you just absolutely guffawing, and you all of a sudden the tears are rolling simply because you're laughing so hard. And then all of a sudden it can switch inside me. I've had this happen more than once. All of a sudden it switches inside and I'm sobbing from all of those things that I said I would cry about later.
Mm-hmm.
So there can be that extreme too.
Mm-hmm. Sure, because you're talking 48 years of abuse. Is that what we've discussed? You've counted up as 48 years. There's a lot of things in that 48 years that you didn't cry about when they happened.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's true. So sometimes it's not necessarily a good thing to turn on a tearjerker movie. Sometimes maybe you need to turn on a comedy.
Mm-hmm. I, in my own personal life, am very well aware of that. Like, I will instantly be like, this is absolutely the wrong time to watch this movie.
Mm-hmm.
If they say one thing, I'm like, that's the thing that we're not going to talk about right now.
Mm-hmm.
Referring back to when I was dealing with the grief of having my miscarriage, if there was even a hint that somebody was pregnant and they're going to the doctor, I'm like, I'm out. Like, I can't watch this right now. I can't watch this. And so, there's wisdom in knowing yourself well enough to know what you need to put in front of your face and what you don't need to.
And that reminds me of my son. After we had to put my pup to sleep, and my son and his boys came over that night, and we sat down and watched a movie, and he was going to let the boys pick what they wanted to watch. And the youngest one, he said, not an animal movie, no animals in there. So he tried to pick another. My son said, no animals. And I don't know that I had even really thought about that, but that's just, see, he's a standard for me to look for if I ever get married again. And if they don't come anywhere close to where he is, forget it. Nothing, it's just not going to happen, because he is that kind of a caring person, and he is not emotionally vacant. And he does deal with his own emotions, and he helps me deal with mine. He checked on me every single day for probably 2 weeks, close to 2 weeks after we had the dog put down, and he would check on me after my mom died every day too. But he knew that I had done enough pre-grieving that it was just literally, it was a relief to see her relieved of all of her suffering.
Right.
Whereas it was the suddenness with my dog that made the difference.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we think about that with abusers too. Again, when we're talking about that emotional vacancy or whatever else, it just further confirms your lack of worth in that relationship. When it's not okay for you to feel angry, it's not okay for you to feel sad, it's not okay for you not to be okay. It just confirms your lack of value. Humans aren't created that way.
Right.
And so if you're in that relationship and the abuser has not created a safe space for feelings, and again, I'm talking joyful and sad, like feelings all the way around, it's not a safe space.
Right.
In an abusive relationship, the abuser is going to be the one that sets the tone for the emotion. If the abuser says we're angry, then we're angry. If we're happy, then we're happy. If we're depressed, then we're depressed. And totally takes control over that other person's emotions.
Yeah.
And so in addition to when we're talking about escaping from abusive relationships, we're escaping from abusive relationships only to be thrown into an environment where we're by ourselves. Coming out of a place where we've been told it's not okay to feel your feelings, but now here you are with all of these feelings to feel. What do you do with them?
It's overwhelming.
So, it prompts my statement, why are we surprised when people in crisis act like they're in crisis? Because when you're in crisis, you are going to not say things properly, or you are going to have a short fuse and fly off the handle. And are you flying off the handle because of this one thing, or is flying off the handle today deflecting from this other thing that you don't really want to think about right now? And who knows? You know what I mean? Like, we have to have the ability, we have to allow for people to have the ability to feel what they feel.
Mhm.
And then the most that we can do is try to help them begin to feel it in an appropriate way if they're expressing it in a not so great way. Screaming and yelling at everybody around you is probably not the right way to deal with your feelings. But to say I'm angry and I don't know what to do with it, well, then let's help figure out what to do with it.
Right. And that brings up just what you said, just brings up so many things in my mind. I can remember being there at the shelter and I thought, oh my goodness, what a totally different scenario it would be if all of these women were in one place having to eat meals together and this sort of thing. And you could just see it would be almost like fireworks going off
Mm-hmm.
left and right, and all over the place. And it was
Mm-hmm.
so awesome. We've talked about this before, but it was so awesome that we could each have our own little cottage to go to and just be ourselves, watch what we wanted to on TV or not watch TV, or read a book or not read a book. Or, and another thing I thought about is how that there was a need for volunteers. And here you had this place, full of women, and yet you needed volunteers. And I can just see somebody sitting on the outside looking in saying, well, make them volunteer. No. If they want to volunteer, they can volunteer. But they are women in crisis, men and women in crisis. So if you call it the crisis center, there is a reason. And it saps your energy to be working through, processing through every minute of the day, processing through what you've just come out of. Yeah, if you are processing through what you've just come out of, all the abuse, every minute of the day, you don't have the emotional energy to volunteer to do anything. You don't have the energy to go out and you fill in the blank, you know.
Yeah.
You may not even have the energy to go out and clean your car. You
Yeah.
just don't.
Yeah. It's grossly inappropriate to expect that someone in that situation volunteer. And I'll tell you, over the years, it has been suggested to me that we should do just that. And over the years, I refuse every single time.
Good, thank
If
you.
somebody wants to, and we do have people saying there that, idle minds sometimes can be bad. And so I can't stop thinking, do you have something I can do to get my mind off of it? Sure.
Mhm.
If you ask, I can find something for you, but
Sure.
I'm never going to require it. It's completely inappropriate.
It is, thank you. And I appreciate you not requiring that.
In the same way, when someone goes to a hospital to convalesce, like they have their surgery, they're convalescing, it'd be grossly inappropriate for the nurse to come in and say, okay, well, now I need you to go mop the floor because you're staying here. That doesn't make any sense. And so, we have people that, let's use that word convalesce.
Mhm.
You're escaping from an abusive relationship where you've been
Mhm.
physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, financially, sexually abused.
Mhm.
You have to have time to heal.
Yeah.
And so if all you can do today is lay in bed, so be it.
Mhm.
I don't have the right to put an expectation on your healing.
No, no.
And we all heal differently in different ways and in different times, different
Mhm.
timelines.
Mhm. I am coming on 20 years since I left, and I am still healing from it.
Mm-hmm.
So, if anybody wants to say you need to put a timeline and at this point, okay, get over it already. No, it's not. No, that's grossly inappropriate also.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree.
Mhm.
And so, when I say the one thing that we promise somebody when they come and stay at the crisis center, we make one promise. We're going to do everything in our power to provide a safe space for you. That's our promise. That's it. That's the one promise, safe space. Safe implies physically safe. The structure is physically safe, but it's also a safe space to express yourself, whether that's verbally, emotionally, in writing, whatever that is, it's a safe space.
Mhm.
Just to be who you are with no expectation and no requirement.
Mhm.
Because coming out of that abusive relationship has been nothing but expectation and requirement that you fit into somebody else's mold.
Mhm.
I don't want power and control over anybody.
That's awesome.
So come and do your thing.
Mhm. It brings up the word picture to me of, the little child's cube, and on each side it has a different shape block that you can put through, and only that block will fit in there. So what you're saying is, like, if you are that oval shaped block and you need to go into this particular shape right here that's a star, it's not going to happen unless you take a hammer and pound it in there, and then there's going to be splintering and a lot more pain.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So don't do it.
Exactly, exactly. And you're so wise not to require that.
I don't want anybody to require that of me.
Very good.
Like when I go through the emotional things I go through in my life, I don't want somebody to tell me how I have to heal.
Mm-mm, mm-mm,
I will never forget for as long as I live, and it's appropriate to share it right now, when I did have my miscarriage. It
mm-mm,
was incredibly painful for me.
mm-mm,
And it was very, very fresh and very, very new, like a week old. And there was a person in my life, and I'm not even going to say who that person was, because in describing who that person was in my life, you could figure it out. There was a person in my life who got mad at me because I didn't want them to hug me. And that person, she said to me, I need to hug you because you're sad. And I said, I don't want you to touch me.
mm-hmm,
And that person was irritated with me because I was not in a place that I wanted to receive her hug.
mm-hmm.
And I have always remembered the way I felt on that particular day, because the message you communicated was, you need to hug me.
Oh,
Your needs are more important than mine, apparently, in this scenario. So it's your problem, not mine. But you're communicating to me that I don't know how to grieve properly because I don't want you to touch me.
yeah.
So let's make the situation that I'm in feel worse.
Yeah,
Because
right.
it was a good friend of mine. And
Oh.
so on any other occasion, this person hugged me multiple times in my life, which I joyfully received and returned.
Mm-hmm.
On this particular time, don't touch me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it was not acceptable for me to feel that way.
And sometimes in that situation, you can't even explain why you feel that way,
Right.
but that's where you are, and that's okay.
Hmm. And so I know she meant well. I know the intention was pure, but when all of a sudden it became an argument of her like trying to physically grab me, and I'm like, stop. How far is too far? Like, that's too far.
And that, to me, I see that as a little example of wanting to have power and control over you and your healing, and that's not right.
No, a little narcissism going on there, I think,
Mm-hmm.
because it would have made her feel better if I had let her hug me.
Yeah, yeah.
But when you're in the process of grieving, it's not your job to make other people feel better.
No.
And
Mm-mm.
so again, why that's challenging if you're trying to grieve anything in an abusive situation, a car accident, or you lost your house to a fire, a tornado just went through, or lost a child, lost a parent, whatever it is. It's not your job to grieve in the way that makes the abuser feel better. Like,
Mm-mm.
nobody has the right to tell you that. And so that becomes the narcissistic. You have to let me do these things so that I can be the hero here, but I
Mm.
don't want you to be the hero. And
Okay.
so, in the public eye, is that abuser going to be like holding, your mother passed away? Is that abuser going to be holding your hand and rubbing your back and all the love? And then you get in the car, and then the abuser berates you and says how embarrassing you were because you had snot running down your face, or whatever it is. Like, it's false, it's false comfort. And
Mm-hmm.
as the victim of domestic violence, it's false comfort. And
Mm-hmm.
so that makes it worse. It doesn't make it better.
No, it doesn't. Mm-mm.
So, I mean, and that's a pretty good description of the original topic of how hard is it for somebody to go through a crisis in an abusive situation. I mean, that's a prime example right there. Because again, we know that the abuser, the public person and the private person are two different people.
Mm-hmm.
And so in public, that abuser is going to be the rock, so to speak.
Yeah.
And then in private, the abuser is going to hit you with that rock.
Mm-hmm. Good picture there. Yeah. Very true. So I think what we're trying to convey here for people who are not, have never been in any kind of an abusive situation, you need to give your friend, person that you know who is in a relationship like that, you need to give them some space, give them some grace to let them just be themselves and grieve through the process of whatever they're going through, but make sure that you are there for them to help them escape, to help them, and you fill in the blank.
Yeah.
Am I
And on
summing
any
that up?
given, yeah, and on any given day, someone in an abusive relationship is grieving the loss of what they thought their relationship was going to be on any given day.
Mhm,
Today, tomorrow, the next day,
mhm.
because the expectation entering into that relationship was we're in a loving, committed relationship.
Mhm.
And now the person who said they love me is the person who's hurting me. And so on any given day, that person needs space to grieve, a
And
safe space.
absolutely. And I'm telling you, I felt that from the time I realized, it was about 10 years into our marriage, 10 or 11 years in, that I finally had my eyes open. It took that long. And then I realized, oh my goodness, this is abuse. And then for the next 12 years, there was literally, it was just in the pit of my stomach. And I dealt with it every minute of every day, Becky,
Exactly.
that I was in this and I didn't want to be, I shouldn't have been. And how do I get out of it? I mean, it was just this hopeless, it was like I had swallowed a hopeless cannonball and it was inside of me and it physically hurt.
Hmm.
I didn't know how to deal with it. So if you're someone that you know that is in a relationship, and they're living in the home with an abuser, and you see a change in their personality, that could be part of it. Part of it also could be simply the power and control that's over them. But I just want you to know they know. They probably know, especially if they have that big of a personality change. You want to say anything to that? So you
You
can
said it.
better.
No, you said it.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, my son and I were talking about that, about hopelessness and what that feels like. And I said, "Oh, listen, I understand hopelessness when you feel like there is no way out. Because
Hmm.
like I said, back then when my kids were growing up, there weren't shelters for me to go to get to have a safe space to just be,
Right.
that would help feed me and give me a place to sleep and a roof over my head. And it felt hopeless to be stuck. And that's literally what it felt like. I was stuck in that home with him as my prison guard, basically. And
Yep.
that home became my prison.
Yes.
Even though I had the keys to the car, it was my prison, because where am I going to go? I had nowhere
Right.
to go.
Right.
hmm
And he was banking on that.
Oh, yeah. You better believe it. Yeah, he didn't want me to work because he knew if I got around other people, then people would be giving me an out, more or less. And I
Hmm.
would be finding out that's not right for him to treat you like that. Oh, it's
Hmm.
not? Well, if I was at home, not working, then guess what? I was never going to find that out. And there was
Right.
part of me that I wanted to stay at home and raise the kids too. So I'm not just putting that totally on him. I don't want to do that. But it was he was heavy handed about it, that he wanted me
Hmm.
to stay home too. And so that was not something that I ever really tried to rock the boat on that. But it was
Yeah.
very convenient for him.
Yeah.
hmm
Yeah.
What else can we say to kind of sum all of this up that we've been talking about tonight? Because I don't want to, I almost feel like maybe we're leaving people hanging, and I don't want to do that. Is there a way that we can sum it up a little better or wrap it up a little better?
I mean, I think it's just the awareness part of it primarily. The bottom line is we're created to be emotional beings, and we all have the need to have the freedom to feel our feelings and express them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the requirement for that for all of us in order to feel our feelings and express them is that we have the safety of doing that, whether physically safe and emotionally safe. And so, if you're in a relationship with a person who takes your emotions and then turns them around and uses them against you, that's not emotionally safe. I mean, those kind of things. And so paying attention to that. But the problem is, and same thing you just described, um, abusive relationships don't start abusive. They start as loving, committed relationships. And so, the cliche statement that I say all the time that I heard the woman years ago say, one morning I woke up in a box and I had no idea how I got there, and I had no idea how to get out. And so unfortunately for the victim of domestic violence, by the time they realize this is what's going on, they're so far ingrained in it
Yeah.
that turning around and walking away is not an option. And so I think the main message that I think we need to communicate is in our daily lives, we need to have grace in dealing with people
Mm-hmm.
and pay attention to, we can't just assume we know where somebody's coming from. We can't just assume we understand where they're at in their grief process or why they're grieving or why they can't express it or the challenge in communicating it. We don't know where people are. And so conducting ourselves in such a way is that we conduct ourselves with grace and allow people to be themselves. I mean, that's the main message, but it's hard to do when you're still under the thumb of an abuser.
That's very good, Becky. And I would imagine people might have a lot of questions after listening to us talking back and forth. I just want to encourage you folks to reach out and leave comments. Nobody else is going to see it. We have to give permission. That's why we have it set up on YouTube. We have to give permission before those comments are put out there. And if you don't want it out there, we won't publish it. It's not a problem. How would you want to wrap? I keep putting this back to you. Is there anything else you'd want to say? Because I saw that you were starting to make a comment a little bit ago.
I don't know that I was. People, you're not alone. I want people to know that they're not alone.
Yeah.
Because there are ways. The good thing is that we have now that you didn't have in the initial days of your relationship or whatever else, is there are so many different ways that we can reach out and get help and support.
Mm-hmm.
And in the same way that we've encouraged people when we're talking about their abusive relationship and escaping that abuse, in the same way, they have to have a partner and helping get an agency has to partner with them, or a family member has to partner with them, or as a friend. I mean, my main thing is if you're in a situation where you don't feel emotionally safe, find a place where you are.
That's good. That's good.
And it can be done.
I agree.
People do care.
Yes, they do.
Strangers care.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's just wisdom in knowing who to talk to.
Exactly. I've even heard of people, women in an abusive situation, and they write a note, give it to the receptionist at the dentist office, or give it to the dentist, or give it to the cashier at the store, or whatever. And strangers are willing to give you help. They are. And I didn't see that when I was living in the midst of that, with the abuser having power and control over me. I didn't see that strangers cared about me. They didn't know. And so I thought, I interpreted it that they didn't care because they didn't know. Not true. Not true. And I think the biggest thing came when my advocate gave me something beautiful purse that had been given to the crisis center for an occasion just like that. And I bawled and bawled. I couldn't believe, and it brings up emotions even now. I couldn't believe that a total stranger would care enough to buy that beautiful purse and give it to the crisis center so that on a special occasion, like a birthday or whatever, that I could have a gift. It's still, shucks, that was 20 years ago almost. And I'm still, the tears are there. Strangers do care. Becky is exactly right. Reach out, because there is somebody out there ready to help you. And just remember, folks, that no matter where you are in this process, you're always free to soar. And I say that at the end of every program, but I mean every word of it. And Becky does too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.